welcome to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. My name is Larry Bodine. I'm the president, and I'll be your host today. Let me introduce State Senator Stephanie Stahl Hamilton. She represents the old District 10 in the state Senate. She's been in office since 2021 when the supervisors appointed her to fill a vacancy. And today, she is running for election to the Arizona House of Representatives to represent the new District 21. She's on the ballot in the primary right now. There are other people vying for the position. And what makes Stephanie unique is she is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. She's currently serving the parish as associate at St. Mark's. And Stephanie's faith and love has really, and love for her community has driven her to be involved in coaching cross country for the students, coordinating after school programs, working in schools herself as a substitute teacher, and finally running for public office. So with that, Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Well, good afternoon, good midday to DGT, Dems of Greater Tucson. I am happy to be with you and surely appreciate the opportunity to spend this hour with you. I'm seeing lots of familiar faces, and that's a good thing. We've had a lot of transition this year, and it is a pleasure to spend some time with friends. And that being said, many of you have supported me from the very beginning when running for office was more your idea than it was mine. And the support that you gave at that time is what helped carry me through a campaign in the middle of a global pandemic. And that support is what helped carry me through two of the most extreme legislative session in Arizona's recent history. And as I've been home and in those spaces where I have been home in Tucson, it's those conversations in passing on the weekends and in the interim, the walks around Reed Park, the phone calls, the Zoom sessions, all of the ways in which you all checked in to let me know that you are engaged is why I serve, and I am happy to do so. Not every day is a happy day. Some days are more challenging than others, but it is a privilege and an honor to represent. And being able to represent you and our collective values is a privilege and a responsibility I take to heart. And so I really am grateful that you all are here today. It's been quite the 2 years as a state representative and a state senator. And if I have learned anything in the last 3 years before I was in office, it's that one can't ever predict exactly what the future is going to look like. And what I do know is that no experience is ever wasted. 3 years ago, I came to DGT and shared my story with you all, told you about the journey that led me to run for the House of Representatives, that I was born to educators who began their teaching careers on Navajo tribal lands in northeastern Arizona, that I had spent some time on the East Coast before returning to our state. And then I shared that as my husband, Derek, and I began our family, I shared the challenges we faced raising our 3 children on a teacher's salary. I shared with you all the struggles we had in finding quality, affordable healthcare for our very active children. And as I mothered my children, I began to see how our state's legislature shapes, for good or bad, the everyday lives of the people in Arizona. I told you how I found advocacy groups to join and how I fought to repeal the expansion of school voucher laws, and that in all of my work, because of the many people I met along the way, I knew I wanted to work in the state legislature. And with my hopes and my energy and the support of many people, 3 years ago, we kicked off a campaign to get me elected. And I ran on a platform of support for public education, healthcare, and sensible gun safety laws. We got me elected, and then I was placed on the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee and the Government and Elections Committee. And even though I was not appointed to the committees I thought I wanted, I was appointed to two of the most important committees for the state of Arizona. Both play a critical role in Arizona's future. If we do not have clean air to breathe and enough water to drink, none of the other policies we make will matter. However, we cannot change our trajectory in this state if we do not change the power dynamic of the legislature. And right now, our voting freedoms and our democracy are under attack. So it is imperative that we make a plan to elect Democrats up and down the ballot, and that we stay focused and united in our efforts to move our state forward at all levels. And in the meantime, we are the minority party, and there is an imbalance of power at play. I've learned this past legislative term how and when we show up can affect that power dynamic. It is important to build relationships on both sides of the aisle, because it's in those relationships where leverage is found. It is also important to remain rooted and steadfast in one's values, because respect is earned by being who you say you are 100% of the time. And these are the tools, the relationship building and the earning respect, that are two of the most important factors in creating change in a power dynamic that does not favor the minority party. Consistency, persistence, and dogged determination is what has carried previously failed legislation across the finish line for those of us who are Democrats. And all of this speaks to effort over time. I know I've taken a few minutes to talk about the nature of serving in Arizona's state legislature, and I am happy to answer your questions as best as I can as it relates to policy. But if you'll indulge me for a few minutes more, let me just share with you a bit more of what I've learned and where I have served these past 2 years. So I already told you that I served on the Government and Elections Committee and the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee when I was elected to the State House. But when I was appointed to the Arizona Senate last October, I was also appointed to 4 committees: the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water, Finance, excuse me, Judiciary, and Ethics. I will admit that serving on the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee has been one of the most pleasant surprises during my time in the legislature. Being able to work on issues related to the environment, energy, and water has not only been very interesting, but it has helped me realize I am a bit passionate when it comes to these topics. In regards to forest management and forest health, this topic is one that I understand from a place of experience. Having to deal with the Wallow Fire back in 2011, when it burned through the summer camp where I was the executive director. We've spent more than a decade working with the Forest Service and learning all there is to know about forest health in order to return to our site and resume operations in the White Mountains. And because of my knowledge and experience, this past summer, I was asked to serve on an ad hoc committee dealing with forest health and forest fires in our state. Serving on the Judiciary Committee this past session was another committee that I would have never guessed how much I could enjoy. I was somewhat intimidated by the thought of serving on this committee because I don't have a law degree. But then I learned that neither do most of the Republicans on this committee. And what I came to realize is that it doesn't take a degree in law to exercise compassion and common sense. So serving on this committee has provided an opportunity to address issues of reproductive freedom, the rights and freedoms of trans children, legal reform, criminal justice reform, election law, and gun legislation. And as you can see, I am putting in the work and showing up dedicated to the task. I share your values, and I am committed to you all in the fight to move Arizona forward with sound, compassionate policies that provide opportunities for all Arizonans, especially those among us who are the most vulnerable. I want to thank you again for your time and the opportunity to share some of my experience and reasons why I am running again to serve in our state's legislature. And now I'm assuming we have some time. I am very happy to take your questions.
All right, thanks so much, Stephanie. So just to go over the routine, if you want to ask a question live, simply click on the reactions button and indicate that you want to raise your hand or type your question into the chat, and it will be read on behalf for you. So I see Michael has his hand up. Go right ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Larry. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi. My
voice is a little hoarse. I don't know why, so please excuse that. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about this year's compromise budget, and some of the positive things that are in it, which are definitely there, and some of the negative things that are in there that are definitely there. I'd like to get your perspective on the budget.
Well, in all full disclosure, the budget reconciliation bills, and I think there were probably a dozen or so of them that we voted on as it pertains to the different aspects of the budget. And I have to admit that I voted no on every one of those. So I was not one of the bipartisan votes on the budget. But well, there's no buts about it. I was a no. Because I still think that we passed a budget that it does not do enough or go far enough to help most people in the state of Arizona. I will say for the Republicans, they had to eat a little bit of crow because they were hell-bent on passing a budget without needing any Democratic votes, and said as much. Again, this was one of the longest sessions in the state's history because they took it right down to the wire, holding out, confident that the Republicans could get most of their members on this, on their, not to get all of their, sorry, not most, but get all of their Republican members together to agree on a budget. And there's just too many extremes that it wasn't going to be feasible. And so ultimately they had to come back to the Democrats and negotiate a little bit. Well, to be quite honest, I think we weren't able to go far enough with our negotiations. You know, the one of the interesting things about being on the underside of the power dynamic at the bottom is that you get blamed for everything. If we would have held out and continued to play hardball and the state would have had to shut down because we didn't have a budget agreement by June 30th, it would have been the Democrats' fault, not the Republicans who refused to negotiate with us and told us that any amount of negotiation would go out the window once they got all their members from both chambers on the budget. And so we really did have them over a barrel. Now, that being said, the big conversation was that education won the day with funding that we've been asking for the better part of a decade to go back into the general budget. However, there are trade-offs there, and the reason I voted no on that education budget. So we've got the funding that we've asked for, but in the budget reconciliation bill, the state has eliminated our equalization formula. So one of the things that made Arizona pretty unique and special was that the taxes that we pull in, property taxes to fund schools, don't stay within the property tax zones. It goes into the general fund, and that is distributed equitably throughout the state, because as we know, there are some areas that are more impoverished than others and don't have the ability to pull in the same tax revenue based upon property values. And our state saw fit this year to eliminate that equalization formula. But because we had all of the extra money going into funding schools, most people were not worried about it. I pretty much came unglued when I found out we were doing that, because down the road, should we hit a recession, it's going to come back to disproportionately affect our lower income neighborhoods and students who attend schools and are on the lower end of the economic spectrum. And it's not forward thinking, it's not sustainable thinking. So that was a trade-off for me in the education budget. And then the other piece is, apart from the budget, there was enough votes to pass universal voucher expansion. And as I had mentioned, I worked hard in 2017 to refer our voucher expansion to the voters, and in 2018 worked for Save Our School to overturn that law. And the voters in Arizona overwhelmingly rejected the voucher expansion. And so here we are, 5 years later, starting the process all over again. And truly nothing will undermine education funding more quickly than this universal voucher expansion. And we lose all kinds of accountability. So, for me, it wasn't, it was hard for me to look at this as a bipartisan effort. I think some folks saw an opportunity to get more education funding. And I reached out to Dr. Trujillo from TUSD, because most of the schools in the district that I represent are TUSD schools. And I said, Dr. Trujillo, we need to have a conversation about this budget and how this affects TUSD. And so I was in close communication with him. And at the end of the day, ended up voting my conscience, because the gains that we've been able to have, we may or may not be able to access that money. And then the last little bit, and I know education funding is so nuanced, and I don't want you all, I don't want to bore you with the details, but the last little bit is the education expenditure limit. And that was a big deal this legislative session, because we have state statutes that says we can only spend a certain percentage of our general funds on education funding. And so we dumped all this money into upcoming budgets, but we are going to far surpass that expenditure limit. And a big reason for that is we continue to keep shrinking our general fund. So, which then does disproportionate, that's got the opposite effect of increasing the percentage of what we are spending on education. It's not an accurate reflection of what we need to have quality schools in the state of Arizona. So a long answer to say that I most of the budget I don't think went far enough. We didn't put near enough into the housing trust fund. We have not done enough for healthcare in our state. We certainly have created raises for law enforcement and first responders. And I still go back to, we need to increase that funding for our educators, and we won't need a lot of this other funding. And at the same time can enact some criminal justice and legal reform. So for me, I was glad to see that they finally started negotiating, but I'm not so sure that this was a true bipartisan budget, because I don't believe that it really reflects democratic values, the budget that was ultimately passed.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie, for that. Let's turn to Susie Anderson, who has a question. Go right ahead.
Hi, Stephanie. So good to see you. Thank you for being out in this heat. What I'm wondering is, when you win, what committees do you?
Oops.
Susie, you muted, but I'm assuming the question is, what committees will I ask to serve on?
Yes, and also, okay, sorry, I got muted and lost my train of thought. Okay, and if you get back on the water committee, will you have any effect on putting a damper on Ducey's plan to put in the plant in Mexico or on the border that reduces the saline in our water, which is
Yeah.
a boondoggle.
Right. That's a really good question. So I will ask, I will request, I have a little, amazingly, there's going to be a high turnover, we believe, once everything is settled after the general election. So I will have some seniority, and I do want to stay on the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee. I've put a lot of work into it. I certainly am passionate about it and have spent a lot of time in different parts of the state learning and addressing water issues. The desalinizing of the water, it really is not cost effective for what we generate. It's far more cost prohibitive. I think we might be striking a better deal with California, but all of that being said, I have some concerns about that as it relates to the environment and unintended consequences. Certainly conservation is one approach that we need to have with water, and there are things that we can be doing better. I have started advocating every chance I get for operation called agrivoltaics, which we have some of the best minds at the U of A looking at this, and that's putting solar panels over farmland, and which reduces water use, increases crop yield, and generates electricity. So that you're looking at the environment, you're looking at water, and you're looking at energy transfer. So it hits all of those little parts of the NRU committee. And that's a step in the right direction. But the last little piece when it comes to water in Arizona, aside from looking at the environmental factors, and there's still a lot we have to protect in this state when it comes to dumping and mucking up our fresh water. But the last little piece is rural management regulation. And regulation seems to be a dirty word. I see it as the tool we need to have a path forward so that we do have enough water for generations to come. 80% of our state relies on water that comes mostly from pumping groundwater. And that is not a sustainable path forward. And we don't have any regulations in our rural parts of the state outside of our active management areas. And so not only, the taking the salt out of seawater is a way to acquire more water and to move it from one place to another. But honestly, we have to be able to put in controls in our rural area and slow down what we're taking out of the ground and the water that is not renewable.
All right, let's turn to Joe D. Joe, you've got a question for us?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. First one's from Patricia. You spoke about the importance of being true to your values. How does that impact working with Republicans?
It's the same way it impacts working with Democrats. It is a good question. Believe it or not, not every Republican at the state legislature is an extremist. Right now, the power dynamic is such that the extremes are driving the party because of the idea that the Republicans are in the majority. They shouldn't need to rely on Democrats for votes until they have to rely on us for votes. And truth be told, had the Republicans come straight to the Democrats and said, we're going to negotiate on a budget, it would have slowed down a lot of the extremist behavior that is driving the party and holding the Republicans, driving them, because at the end of the day, the extremists didn't vote for the budget either. But that being said, being who I am, staying true to my values, but showing up with common sense and compassion goes a long way when you're dealing with people. Aside from the R label and the D label, there are some moderate Republicans that I am able to have conversations with and to talk and have meaningful conversations about policy. I will tell you that I have been working with the Federation of the Blind. In fact, I have a meeting with them tomorrow, the statewide organization, and they came to me a year ago with a request to put through some policy in regards to election law and accessibility for voting rights. And I had asked who they had worked with before, and they identified a Republican senator. And I said, well, why don't you go back to that senator? They did not. I think the ball got dropped. They made their ask of me. So at the 11th hour, the very last day that we could craft and drop legislation, I went and found that senator and asked if he had been approached, and he had not. But he was more than happy to take the request and run with it, and said that we could be co-sponsors. He wouldn't mind putting my name on the legislation. And I backed off and said, you know, if my name goes on that as a new person and new in this chamber and as a Democrat, it's not going to go anywhere. And so he took it and ran with it. And lo and behold, it is the only piece of election policy that was permissive and positive that made it all the way through the process. And it was primarily because I knew he was somebody I could trust. He didn't think there was anything wrong with the policy. He was actually in favor of it. And at the end of the day, when we talk about that policy, he uses it in the plural of, we got this done. He still was willing to give me credit. And so for me, that is who I am. It's how I show up. And it's in those relationships where you find your leverage. And so I am always looking for the space where there's leverage, where, you know, and this was a little bill. It wasn't the big stuff. When it comes to the big stuff, that's a lot harder and it's a lot more challenging. And that's a nut I'm still wanting to crack. So I haven't become discouraged yet.
Well, here's one for you. Do you think that they will finally put solar panels over the Cap Canal?
Well, I keep asking, and who knows? Part of what needs to happen with solar, you've got generation, you know, that's where the solar panels are designed to capture the sun and generate energy. You need storage, somewhere to house that energy if you're not using it right away. And so maybe a cloudy day or at nighttime, you know, you've got to have a place to store that energy for future use. And then the third piece is transmission. You've got to be able to transmit that out. Right now, our power grid is set up that we've got the place where it's generated and it transmits to our houses. Solar has that extra component of capture, storage, and then transmission. And our state does not have the infrastructure for storage and transmission just yet. Like agrivoltaics, putting water over the canals, the CAP and the SRP canals, would reduce evaporation. And what I didn't realize, you know, we've got an abundance of sunshine in Arizona, but we also have an abundance of extreme heat. After about, I believe it's 86 Fahrenheit, solar panels start to lose their efficacy. And so a little bit of that evaporation cools the solar panels and then, you know, increases the efficacy of solar panels. So, you know, putting them over the canals, that's twofold. You're allowing what is evaporated to go up, cool the panels so that it generates their effectiveness. With farmland, it's the same thing. You use about a third of the water that you would use. What does evaporate cools the panels and makes them more effective for generating energy. And what we need to focus on in the state, and it's going to be a heavy lift, and it's going to require a lot of the big players coming to the table and deciding they have the political will to do this, but it is to put the money into the infrastructure for storage and then the infrastructure for transmission. But I like your thinking, and it's something that I've been pushing for and asking for and putting out there every chance I get.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let's turn now to Stephen Mizell. Go right ahead, Steve.
If it's okay, I'd like to just double back to a previous topic, and that is the issue of water, which for me is extremely important. And I understand the issue of regulation of groundwater, solar panels, sounds all very good. But I'm wondering if anyone has spoken with any of the experts from Israel. They get 50% of their potable water through desalination. They're the world's experts on desalination. It's a desert. They're drier than Arizona.
Right.
And I'm hoping, so the first question is, has anyone spoken to anybody from that country to gain their?
Well, we have.
And what have you learned?
Yes and no. Yes, we have spoken to folks, but typically that is up to the committee chairs and to the leadership of the majority party. The Democrats don't necessarily get let into those conversations unless we're generating them on our own. But even with that, any policy that we might propose, any legislation that gets dropped has to go through the process of being assigned to a committee. And even if it's assigned to a committee, it's up to the committee chair to hear that legislation. And as far as I know, because I am still so very new at this, and still somewhat a new kid on the block, I haven't been invited into those conversations, and I probably wouldn't. There are more senior members that would be. I do know that a lot of conversation around Israel that has come to us in committee is, and this is just going to sound cynical, and forgive me, but this is what was presented to us, and it was very disheartening. I was excited to have the conversation about drip irrigation, different things that Israel has figured out. And it was a person who came to us from New York State who has a company for drip irrigation, and he gave us all his book and talked to us about Israel, but really what he was talking to us about was giving us a pitch for his product. And so that's the extent of the conversations that we have in committee. As far as some of the other conversations, I've yet to be invited to the table. And if most of the time, if you're not in the conversations happening outside of the ledge, it's hard to know what's going on. So you're absolutely right. I know that Israel has been very smart in their water, but as it filters down to the committee and the decision makers, it comes through the lens of invited to the table.
If I could just follow up for a second, I understand what you're saying. I guess as someone who's not involved in politics, who was in business, I just find it hard to accept the limitation of politics and structure and whose ox is being gored. And I mean, my reaction would be go rogue, get the information, publicize it. Nothing's more important to Arizona. Have that be an issue and make it an issue and get into the media. Because, every time I turn on the TV and I see that the lake, this lake and that lake and is down to nothing, I think people of Arizona would kiss anyone who came up with a viable solution and pushed to get it recognized. So that's my 2 cents, and I thank you.
No, you're not wrong. I am right there with you, and I'm doing my level best. It is, it's amazing how quickly you can get silenced, but I am right there with you, and I am continuing to double down on my efforts to see what we can do about water. I am very, very passionate about it, but it is amazing how much it gets wrapped up into politics. And our agriculture and our cattle growers are the ones with the most political lift when it comes to our natural resources. And I would say it used to be the mining industry, but I think they're starting to lose a little bit of traction, truly. When you look at the 5 C's of Arizona, what we're known for, those are the things that push the politics at the Capitol, and all 5 C's require water. And so it's maddening and it is frustrating, but I'm in there and I'm doing my level best. There's a lot more for sure for me to learn, but also I am pretty relentless. So that's the best I can tell you, is that I'm going to continue just doing what I can to push for better water practices and stewardship and regulation.
Glad to hear it, Stephanie. Let's turn to Steve Early. He's got his hand up.
Hi, Stephanie. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. I have a question for you. Has the state legislature taken and talked about anything about the blight of southern Arizona, which is called Rosemont?
Big heavy sigh. And I'm not sure with Rosemont how much that is state and how much it is federal. I think it's a little bit both. And we, I know those of us who are Democrats, and especially those of us from Southern Arizona, have done everything we can to continue blocking with Rosemont line. But it is the Rosemont mine, and it's my understanding. I won't say any more than that, other than I think there's a lot more work to be done in regards to the Rosemont mine. I think things are stalled a bit, but I don't need to be negative, but and spend a lot of time being negative, other than, those of us from Southern Arizona, especially those of us on NRU, are doing what we can.
Let's turn to our treasurer, Steve Linder. He's got his hand up.
Right. Talking about water, Stephanie, I saw a commercial from one of the idiots running for the Republican for the Senate, Jim Layman, today. And part of his commercial was actually saying his plan for water was to divert the Mississippi River to Arizona. Now, people are going to hear this and say, oh, gee, that's a great idea. So I think, how can we kind of put something out that shows how ridiculous some of these people are, and their fixes just make no sense?
Already in the 2 short years that I have been in the legislature, we have voted on that idea several times, not only in committee, but also in both floors of each chamber. That is an idea that keeps coming up year after year after year. There was a political cartoon put out with a bunch of cowboys, bunch of men wearing cowboy hats and boots with this big long straw from the Mississippi River all the way down to Arizona. So, people say, well, look what we've done with the CAP. Well, the geographical distance and what we've done in the engineering and the cost for the CAP is something very unique to the state of Arizona. Taking water from one place in the United States and moving it half, a country away is through several states and is ridiculous. It's not something that needs to be done at this, that could be done at the state level. We need to manage what we have in our own backyard. So yes, it's ridiculous that this is an idea that he's picked up on and that he's running on. Most of us around the legislature, it gets shot down as quickly as it can, but it's not something that Arizona really has jurisdiction over. This has to come at the federal level, and I know he's running for a federal position. But I don't know. I just would, yes, you're right. It's ridiculous.
Joe Danishevsky is back. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, we have a couple questions in the chat room. Susie writes, what can be done about changing farmers' mindset from cotton to hemp? Is the problem with the changes that need to be made for irrigation, or is it a matter of the THC levels in the hemp?
I think that's a great question. I do know that agriculture, our aggies, as we call them, and they call themselves, are looking at, letting some fields fallow. They're looking at their practices and their growing practices, and perhaps growing crops that are drought resistant and are drought tolerant and drought resistant, as well as a product that is usable and sellable in the state of Arizona. So not just cotton, but a lot of the others. Bell peppers require quite a bit of water, and so it is a big conversation that has been happening. However, we've got places down south in Cochise County, just outside of the new part of the new district that I hope to represent in LD 21, but parts in south in Cochise County that are going in and planting pecan and pistachio groves. Those trees require quite a bit of water, and you're looking at 10 years of watering before you even produce anything that would resemble income for a crop. But those groves and those trees will drastically reduce our water table and drain on groundwater pumping. And so I think, yes, cotton, but also looking at what's going in down south is really very troubling as well. And trying to, again, we have no regulations or very little in our rural areas as far as water management. And so some of it is coming to the table with folks in agriculture and talking about what would be sustainable for them. You know, we've got a lot of family farms that are been handed down through the generations, and it is a livelihood, you know, it's people's livelihood, and they connect to the earth and enjoy growing things, and we need food. But there is somewhat of a stalemate when it comes to having conversations about farming and about water, which is one of the reasons I keep pushing for the agrivoltaics, because I think it's a triple win, and it's a pragmatic, practical solution where I think all of us get what we want. So, you know, those conversations are hard fought, and earning that trust is still going to take some time. I think people still don't believe. I don't want to put them out of business, but I want to have sustainable practices at the table. And most of the mentality is in that arena, people don't want to be told what to do or what they can't do, not what to do, but what they can't do. And so that's a pretty high hurdle to get over.
Okay, looks like we have a question about copper since we talked about the Rosemont mine. So isn't copper even more critical now that it's so valuable for battery storage?
It is more critical, but it is not a sustainable resource. It's not an infinite resource. It's a finite resource. And oh my gosh, I've got my son, one of my son's friends that he's known for years is down here doing some construction work. He's part of an engineering program from ASU, and part of his program has him out in the field, and he was showing and talking about how there's going to be a new mine opening up more towards Maricopa County for copper mining. He's like, that's big bucks. And you know, my son said, is it going to be an open pit mine? And he said, well, of course it is. And so yes, while copper may be critical and there's a lot of money to be had, it destroys, open pit mines destroy our environment. And he said, well, it's pretty remote. And I'm like, remote or not, that to me is just like even more, let's not destroy the pristine natural environment that we have. So you can hear the tension in my voice and the heavy sighs. These are the difficult conversations that we have to step through, acknowledging and recognizing our reliance on copper and the importance of it, but also understanding where is the rub with our natural environment, and how do our mining practices affect natural habitats and our water. So these are conversations that, in my opinion, should take a long time with many stakeholders at the table and not be driven by economics alone.
Okay, here's a great question that I think you'll like. Tell us more about your new district, LD 21, and your campaign.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's so poor LD 10 got chopped up and distributed to 4 different new LDs. I just really astounding that we only have one intact district for the city of Tucson. But the little part of where I live, I kept 14 precincts from LD 10, just 14. So it's a nice little sliver that runs from Campbell right out to, I want to say it's Pantano, and just, it doesn't go too far south as you do the little sliver. But then once you get past 22nd, it jots a little bit west and runs through South Tucson. I mean, the southern part of this, not the city of South Tucson, but South Tucson, all the way down to Nogales. So we pick up Santa Cruz County, and then it travels along the border and comes back up, dances around Sierra Vista, comes back up and grabs Naco and Bisbee. So then I have a little sliver of Cochise County. It is a big, big territory, lots of little towns. I think I picked up 4 precincts from LD, the old LD3, and everything else that is in Tucson all the way down to Nogales is pretty much most of the former LD2. And then Bisbee and Naco is the former LD14. I will tell you, the people in Bisbee, as soon as I knew what was happening and it looked like things were going to be solidified, I got in touch with my friends down in Bisbee, who I worked with when I was stumping for the Prop 305, and let them know that they had a high potential of having Democrat representation, and they are beside themselves. It's been over 41 years since they've had a Democrat representing them. And so I've spent some time down there, spent a lot of time down in Nogales, and learning that southern corridor as we go down to the border, those little towns down the way. I think Amado, part of Sabarita, Tubac, and parts of Arivaca. And I think I said Rio Rico as well. So heading down south. And I'm learning a little more Spanish, so which is will definitely come in handy. But it's a big geographical territory. I've now pulled in 2 other counties. So we've got Pima, Santa Cruz, and Cochise County as this part of this new district. There are 3 of us running for 2 seats. I am the only one in the race for the House that has legislative experience. And certainly, wanting to know about my campaign, please visit my website. And certainly there are links there to, if you want to reach out and get a hold of me, that's great. If you haven't donated and you feel compelled to donate to my campaign, obviously there's a link there to contribute. But mostly that website there is there for me to be accessible to you. And I do my best to try to respond to emails as quickly as I can.
Susie Anderson has a question. Go ahead, Susie.
I'm sorry, just one quick question. Are we recycling copper from our technology, our phones, our, gadgets, computers, the little bits that are used in whatever we've got? Are we recycling so that we will have less of a need to mine for copper?
You know what, Susie, that's a really good question, and something I'm actually going to have to, I don't know the answer to that, but I'd like to know the answer to that, and I am happy to learn it and follow up. I think I know, recycling some of that stuff is really tricky and has to be done carefully. And certainly we should know how to do that. I think we're an educated society and have enough scientists and good thinkers that we can make that happen. But I don't know if we've got any of those facilities here in Arizona. And that's a great question. And I'm going to look into that. I'm kind of excited to know the answer, maybe.
Thank you.
Stephanie, I wondered if you'd be so kind as to bring our meeting to a close. Tell us how we can contact you, how can we find out more about you, and how can we support you?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. My website is stahlhamiltonforaz.com. There's a whole bunch of fun stuff to see there, and ways to reach me. And I think most of my social media is either Stahl Hamilton for Arizona or simply at Stahl Hamilton. I think if you Google Stahl Hamilton, you'll be able to come up with most of those links. Certainly, my website is the easiest way to get a hold of me via email. If you want to donate, make a donation if you want to volunteer, that's great. And certainly if you know anybody who speaks Spanish, that would be a huge help, and wants to volunteer. Spanish speakers are very much welcome to join me on the campaign trail.
All right, thank you so much, Stephanie. It's just been fabulous to have you here at our meeting. And with that, I just want to remind everybody to come to our happy hour, and you are certainly invited, Stephanie.
Thank you.
It's going to be on Wednesday at Brother John's, 4 to 6. And don't forget the thank you party for Victoria Steele a week from today. And you'll be hearing more about that. And with that, I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, Stephanie, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. It's good to see everybody.